uh, virtual building visit, so please bear with us if we have a few teething problems and things don't go perfectly. I'm delighted to be joined today by David Tigg from Tigg and Coll Architects, who is the architect for this project, and also the client, Nick Taussig. So if I hand you over now to David to kind of explain the project.
Thanks, James. Yes, well, thank you all for joining us today. It's a very big privilege to sort of be able to talk you through this really inspiring project we worked on with Nick Taussig, father, and creating a house for Theo and Oskar, which the process began in late 2016. I think just to start off the process, and what we're going to do is I'll go through a presentation just of the overall house, the context, the processes we went through, from planning through construction, and then obviously the final sort of look and feel of the house. But first of all, I'm going to hand over to Nick, Theo and Oskar's father. He was obviously instrumental in setting up the entire kind of process, and I thought what would be best is Nick to give a brief introduction to the project. And as part of this project, he's also was filming the process, and one part of this film, which is going to be coming out soon, we hope, will be looking at the boys and fundamentally, living with Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy. So let me hand you over to Nick briefly, first of all.
Thanks, David. I'm hoping everybody can hear me. Okay. So the boys were diagnosed with Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, which is it's a fatal progressive muscle wasting disease, in 2014. And like most parents, there's an initial state of kind of crisis where you think, God, what do we do? And quite a lot of desperation, followed by, I suppose, just practical questions about what that means for their future, where we live, everything else. We were living in a very sort of tall, thin Victorian house, and we realised that we had to move, and we settled on. We thought, well, let's go for a bungalow, and let's try and find a nice flat plot of land, which we found in Box Hill in Surrey. And then in about 2016, we suddenly started thinking, well, actually, we found a bungalow. It's in a pretty awful state, and we've got to do something with it as quickly as possible, because the boy's condition was getting worse. So it was that's sort of how it came together, the whole thing. I won't kind of go into the detail of the competition, how that came about, how I met David and Tigg and Coll and everything else, probably until David starts the presentation. I think for now, what I can do is David mentioned this film. So what we decided to do really was, in a funny kind of way, the work that Tigg and Coll did was a kind of great architectural response to the diagnosis of Theo and Oskar with Duchenne, and about creating a really great accessible space which enables them irrespective of their serious disability. And what I did with Clara, my wife, was the film was a kind of artistic response. So that was us kind of going, okay, in the same way that architecture looks to kind of make sense of things, the film was another attempt to make sense of Theo and Oskar's diagnosis and the way forward. So I'll show you this quickly, and then I'll hand over to David again.
So what I'm going to do today is just then have a quick overview of the whole process, start to finish, and I'll bring Nick in to give a bit of side commentary on a few interesting fun elements to it, and also kind of aspects of the whole process where it was sort of part of us being introduced as a member of this kind of really fantastic project. So I think initially, really our involvement started in mid to late 2016. And we saw a competition brief in the Architects Journal, I think it was. And as a young architect and also got a young family, and we did, starting out as a design practice, we saw this brief, and we really just generally thought, gosh, we just love to try and help and love to kind of be part of this whole process. And yes, having two very, very young kids ourselves, Rachel and I, who are the Tigg Coll of our practice, we thought, this is something we've really got to try and be involved in, and see what we can do, and maybe we can use some of the things we've learned over the years in designing people's houses, and obviously having kids as well. Can we add something to this and see if we can help to make something of this house, and so make something of this what is a very, very complicated but ultimately something we want to be as an uplifting part of a process. Really, what are we for as architects? And that this was a brief, I thought, that came forward that we really, really could make it amazing and make a change and really do something that was notable and worthwhile. That's something that's on a very manageable scale, and something that's a very, very the basic condition of creating a home. That's a real fundamental of life, and it was something we thought was really, really very exciting. So post kind of seeing the initial brief, we obviously made contact with the organisers, and we went down and met initially Clara and had a look around the house. And I mean, Nick, maybe you could just give 2 seconds on that competition sort of process fundamentally.
Yeah. So I initially reached out to John McCaslin, and was talking to John actually, and sort of said to John, "This is a position we're in. What do you think?" And it was his idea actually to run a competition for young architects. And so the brief was kind of set at architects under 40, or practices, young practices as well. And we saw we had quite a few bids and submissions. Tigg Coll stood out, heads and shoulders above everybody else. I think what David and his team got was the fact that very quickly you realise, particularly when you're a parent of disabled children, that the accessibility is pretty awful. Disability rights have a long way to go, and but also a lot of the common narrative around disability is just really unhelpful, because disabled people don't want pity, they don't want none of these things help. What you want is, you actually just want to work with people who fundamentally see you and your kids like everybody, as everybody else is, the same ordinary everyday strife and struggles we've all got to deal with, and actually really kind of see it as a kind of challenge, like an enabling challenge. And that's what David and his team got. So that's the process we went through the competition. We got it down to a short list, and then David presented with his team, with Helen and Rachel, and they won the competition. And the next stage actually was, I'll hand over to David again now, was really just about then action.
Thanks, Nick. That's fantastic. So really kind of, so taking the fundamentals of firstly kind of just visiting the house, I think was really the first stage of it, when we were we hadn't even put any ideas together yet for what we were going to do. So apart from having a very high level brief from Nick and Clara, it was really visiting the house and seeing what that was all about. And what we came and what we saw was what I can really describe as a kind of a really beautiful kind of microcosm of the Surrey Hills. It's near Box Hill. It's such a lovely area of the world, and a really very cute cottage. needed work. It was, a little bit run down, very kind of rustic, but had a fantastic kind of setting. And I think obviously one of the points that, Nick and Clara saw when they bought it, but, we could immediately see when we were there, it was a very magical plot, a very magical house in a beautiful garden. And, these are the things that we really wanted to, hold on to. And it was this kind of idea that it was a great place for I think for kids to grow up in, fundamentally. And clearly this is what Nick and Clara saw when they were buying it, but you could very easily see it when you visited within almost a few minutes. And so we came around the house, we looked around it, we kind of had a really nice sort of morning with Clara and the boys, and sort of just spent some time with those guys in the house, and actually probably more time, I think, actually in the garden and looking at their trails and how they use it and all these things. And really that kind of set us up for, our thought process of how we should, approach the overall project. But you can kind of see from even this overview here that the main kind of road that kind of leads you up and actually eventually lead you into the kind of Surrey Hills was here. The plot was sort of facing east-west and had this enormous big garden, but had actually a lovely kind of space offset from this very, very quiet road where, you're nestled between a kind of a relatively suburban setting of houses on their own plots, kind of relatively close together, but fundamentally all kind of individual houses of different sizes. And yes, as Nick rightly pointed out, it was a bungalow, but had been extended over time and just tired and just needed kind of a new family and a new lease of life, really. So kind of that existing site context sort of then brought us down to obviously the realities of what we were coming up against and what we needed to do to the house to make it possible for Theo and Oskar to grow up there, I think. And one of those, obviously that sort of bottom line sort of fundamental was kind of creating level access. Now, a cottage sort of built what's probably sort of between the walls, had a sort of gorgeous sort of veranda out the front, had been extended in possibly a bit of a haphazard fashion over time. But as a result, neither did it really have kind of level access throughout, nor did it was very narrow corridors, kind of, very traditional cellular house, kind of cottage style, which on a basic level was wonderful. But yes, given what the future held, we needed to make significant changes and alterations to improve it and to make it viable as a family home. And beyond that, there was kind of garages on the site which were kind of very much asbestos ridden, and these sort of aspects. And as a result, these very quickly became sort of the fundamentals of consideration. So really kind of moving on beyond that, I think it was really then the sort of our initial reaction and our considerations when we were putting proposals together for Nick and Clara and their team when they were assessing who the right architect were. It really came down to a few fundamentals, and these had to be really was a lens for considering the whole design throughout the process from start to finish. From conceptual, architectural move right through to construction detailing. And then, the sort of wider parameters of how do you consider it going to be used for that next 10, 15, 20 years after, we've sort of, dusted it off, taken our nice finished photos, how are Nick and the family and the boys going to use this house and how will that evolve going forward? And really that first point of it is that sort of adaptability to future needs. You can see here a diagram we put together after we did some research, about Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Was, from the early years, it's obviously there is an awareness of it, but it's not, it becomes progressive. And Nick, feel free to jump in here, but our understanding, and as we were, getting a full understanding of Duchenne's, was actually the significant progression happens, from that sort of 10 to 14 years plus. And certainly when sort of puberty kicks in, and that's when the sort of significant changes, and particularly fundamentally when the boys grow fastest, and that's where it kind of has its most significant impact, on boys. And actually, one small point here, I say boys because actually Duchenne's is fundamentally a male disorder. It's not for some reason, I don't know clearly why, it doesn't affect females. So that sort of baseline sort of consideration, and actually then again that lens of adaptability and the sort of, obviously Duchenne's, I mean, like anything, it affects every single person in slightly different ways, and obviously its progression, it fundamentally again can impact you in more severely or less severely, although the fundamentals don't differ. And so again, we had to think about those kind of potential unknowns within a consideration of design, and and that was kind of almost at the beginning, it was very, very hard for us to conceptually get our head around, like how is that possible to do? So really, that adaptability and consideration of mobility, and sort of getting recommendations from occupational therapists, and the consideration of how motorized wheelchairs can work, and then really also kind of further down the line thinking about kind of movable partitions, hoist systems, and really kind of these real kind of very, very important, also medical requirements had to be considered at that briefing stage almost. So next down the list was obviously that sort of connection to the outdoors, beautiful gardens, and incredible kind of setting. We wanted to make the most of it, and B, for any child, and wanting to be able to always fling open the doors any time the day, and be able to use the garden, feel the garden, and sort of sense that kind of placement of a house within that setting. And beyond that was the kind of point that actually the existing house didn't have actual level access either. So it was both entry, exit, and connectivity within the house. And that kind of brings us on to that point of it being barrier free. Kind of the notion of moving freely around a house, and disability not becoming. We wanted to kind of design something where that really wasn't. We wanted to kind of release as much as we possibly could that issue from being something that was part of an everyday reality. We really wanted to make a home where every space was interconnected, and Theo, Oskar, and and Nick and Clara, and they also have a younger brother, could use equally well all the spaces in the entire house, so that it really was very much just a typical family home. And beyond that kind of idea of responsive environments. So any house with a young family, anybody knows who has a young or growing family, kind of just giving them opportunities for everyday activities, for play, for work. And gosh, isn't work now completely changed than it was sort of 3 or 4 years ago? Again, goes back to that lens of adaptability. How could the boys and parents live, be schooled, and work all together in the same space? And then obviously that last point of kind of how do you create joy out of all these issues? Creating kind of an inspiring environment for children to grow up in. That was certainly something very much on our minds. And then beyond that, again, there was the brief came with a very limited budget. I think it was kind of between 50 and 100K to refurbish the house and build an extension, which is, very, very tight. And so we had to think, even at this early stage, about, well, even with these very complex needs, how can we do that so that we're considering the materials and the sort of the buildability from that first stage? Could we be doing it in sort of cross-laminated timber, cassette panels, where it doesn't require another finishing layer on top? So whatever we're building with can be fundamentally that finish, and that in itself can be quite joyful. So all of those sort of things combined was kind of then focus our minds to then well, what is it physically we're going to be doing on the site to sort of achieve that brief for Theo and Oskar? So moving on to that next step was kind of how the considerations of this existing plan. And you can see here on the left, the existing house was very much, as we sort of noted, that kind of typical kind of cottage style house that does have an upper floor within the roof, a very, very narrow staircase, kind of quasi-cellular rooms. And this actually what was a sort of is a lovely veranda at the front, and kind of smaller openings towards the rear. And it had been, as I say, extended over time with little annexes on the far side and a sort of garage on the opposite side. But really, it's the garden and the nature of the layout which really kind of we thought was fantastic. And how could we add on to the house, but not ruin or kind of sort of take away from what's there, and kind of that very much a very characterful cottage. So kind of I think kind of notion of these diagrams at the bottom was that kind of locking in a new extension where there was this sort of old asbestos garage and various little sheds, so that sort of you maintain a kind of the relative nature of the shallow kind of plan form of the house. But at the same time, create a kind of a neat link between an existing house and a proposed element, which was to contain the boys' bedrooms fundamentally, but a new entrance from the main drive over here. And actually, kind of possibly further down the line, was to consider another bedroom. Like this is now actually being taken over by Theo and Oskar's younger brother. But I think at the time it was also considered whether it could be a sort of an potentially in-house carer further down the line, and then obviously to create a kind of a shared bathroom nestled in the middle to give the boys a proper accessible bathroom for the future. So that those sort of component parts really kind of were the core link. And above and beyond that, you can note in these diagrams was actually kind of consideration of light and how we can make sure we created a new extension to the house, which was a big extension given the size of the existing dwelling. And I think it came in at circa about 1,000 square foot actually in the end. That actually doesn't, as I say, doesn't over dominate it, but can sit neatly alongside it. And actually, as I say, the fundamental of making sure that this kind of east-west plot and, getting great daylight into the bedrooms and making them themselves just sort of wonderful spaces, and any existing spaces we were enhancing was absolutely crucial. So going beyond that again, so once we'd sort of really configured the house to have a logic of where are we extending, we'd set out our kind of rules, as it were, for how and what we need to achieve in each of the bedrooms, and work that through with both Nick, Clara, and the boys. We then sort of moved on to that kind of notion of consideration of the kind of roof concept and a tree canopy. And really, again, it came from the idea of actually the garden and how the boys were playing, and really our first visit. And really we wanted to see this extension as a sort of a tree canopy and effectively a roofscape that could achieve all these very complex goals of giving a home that was adaptable. These spaces were light filled, but also kind of a lovely, a real truthfulness of materiality within that would feel right within that lovely sort of magical kind of garden setting. And again, all these other sort of issues that were intrinsic to the brief was creating a canopied space, both outside the bedrooms, that would create that kind of interstitial area between inside and outside. So not only level access, but really something where, the boys could either, as a younger, could just sit and play outside and have a kind of, this protective envelope and something covered if it was a drizzly day, say. But, going further forward where perhaps, Duchenne had a very kind of degrading impact, and, that going through the garden became more and more tricky, it would still become a kind of a lovely space just to be. And really always these fundamental ideas, which is for the family to spend time together in, winter, dreary weather as it is at the moment, but going through to summer where, it's just a lovely kind of nice canopied space to sort of get a little bit of protection from the sun. And as we kind of developed that further, we started to do some small, very simplistic kind of internal modeling of engaging with the boys' bedroom spaces, and how then they could, would link, and getting those views out onto the garden and discussing them not only with Nick and Clara, but also the boys. And again, it wasn't just about kind of just the glazing, but also, actually how can we get some roof lights in to actually always get light back deep into the plan. It's just a fundamental issue of ours, and certainly as a practice, it's that kind of idea of, where there is sort of lovely natural light, to sort of always make the most of it, because it always enhances spaces and houses, and how light changes throughout the day. Kind of, it's just brings enormous character to any space. So as we developed spaces and became closer and closer to getting planning, it was about creating kind of obviously the existing house set here to the southern side of the site, and then making sure the boys' bedrooms, as with any kids, you want to make them very much sort of even size, but they also kind of making sure that they both got incredible views out onto the garden. And also kind of the idea that this, the heart of the home is that kind of kitchen, dining, kind of living space. And, that in itself needed to work, very, very well within integrating both, becoming that bridge between the existing house and this lovely cottage, but also the new extension wing to the house. And also kind of, this is where we were creating our new link, and actual kind of a new entrance to the house itself. So, ultimately, as the architecture started to evolve, the consideration, well, how do we want that to sit? Do we want that to become more primary? Do we like to sit it kind of secondary? How should that relationship really work? And these ideas sort of evolved over time. And so sort of fundamentally, that sort of the end proposed layout we were going to progress forward with was creating, as I say, use carer's room at the front, a new entrance, and giving a generous entrance opening here that kind of mimicked what the porch was doing, and gave a nice sort of positive negative rhythm at the front of the house. And then where this link between the old and the new, and this entrance hall, so really kind of create a nice place for, like, cloaks, everything else, for all the daily baggage of school bags and general life could be dropped off here. And then the boys' bedrooms, and creating these kind of bathrooms off here for the boys, and then coming through to a lovely, generous kind of kitchen, dining, living space at the heart of the home, and then opening where we could, existing openings, to make sure we could get through to a sort of lounge space, and then mum and dad's bedroom over here. So and then a bit of a utility room on the south end of the house. And then, as I say, this kind of creating this sort of lovely covered veranda on this side, which would be which was that kind of created, which was a new room in itself, ultimately, and really kind of it was one of the most important parts of the overall design. So how did that kind of evolve then into, as I say, this sort of linking the old and the new together, and what the architecture would be? And given the sort of nature of, obviously, our existing cottage house, this new extension link needed to kind of be reasonably diminutive, and actually, just as I say, trying to reflect the concept of our veranda on one side, and then we have these are the kind of kitchen windows on this side, and then actually setting it back again, so you've got kind of a lovely positive negative rhythm, and having that fundamental break where the old chimney and the new building, so setting them apart slightly, so there's a real clear articulation between old and new. And really that kind of offsets you against the kind of idea of the existing house here, and then what was the sort of old garage space on this side. And beyond that, we also have to be very conscious of our neighbours, as in any kind of quasi-urban environment. You have to keep your neighbours happy, and this hut project was no different. And so, discussing it with our neighbours on the right-hand side, who were ultimately really lovely guys. Really wanted to make sure that Nick and Clara got the best out of the property, but they had a couple of small windows that we needed to make sure we got daylight to. So that again had a bit of a kind of helped us to evolve the design, but it kept it very much of the vernacular, the pitched roof form. And then as it came towards the back, we could be a lot more expressive and really create something that was really magnificent for the boys as it came around the back of the house. And so this is where we kind of fundamentally got to when we got to our planning application stage. And it really was that sort of culmination of, particularly at kind of the rear, was how do we, this roof form that needed to do so much and needed to work so enormously hard, to create a beautiful kind of light-filled environment that, yeah, as I say, had to be sort of barrier-free. But in itself, it was doing so much work, it became extremely expressive. And it was this idea of this sort of dappled air and light-filled kind of canopy space that that both internally we could sort of overset with roof lights, but the physical engineering of this, although reads lovely and kind of quite simply here, really belies an enormous complexity, where we were cantilevering out the sort of far corners to be able to give it a kind of to create this canopy by almost 5 or 5.5 meters from its structural base point in the corner. And it was designed in such a way, in a cross laminated timber, that we could we could hang swings from the far corner of the building. So if Nick and Clara ever wanted to put up a swing there for the boys, or indeed for Nick himself, I mean, that would be kind of something that would be easily done. And internally, that whole notion of having adaptability, where there were very few walls that were structural, and as a result, if the house needed a change in the future, could easily be done so. And that kind of roof form was fundamental to be able to make that element of the brief possible. So I think probably at this stage, Nick, before I go any further, maybe I kind of bring you in here on our kind of, as we got to planning, we needed to, so we were obviously thinking about kind of all the construction requirements and everything else. And I suppose fortuitously, we came across the partner for the build, and maybe give a bit of a backstory to that.
It was a case of really sort of, I suppose, good fortune, like great good fortune. I spent a lot of time up until sort of 2017 fundraising and working with a medical research charity, which is dedicated to trying to find a cure or significant treatment for Duchenne. And all my time was there. And I got a phone call out of the blue from an old friend who I'd spoken to for some time, who said, "Look, Nick, I think I can help." And it's an old friend of mine called Sarah, and she was about to marry the construction director at Ballymore. So she said to me, I said, "Okay, sounds great, but what are you thinking?" And she said, "Look, it's going to be pretty unorthodox, because obviously what Ballymore does is they do these big residential developments, and they work with certain construction techniques." She said, "But look, Peter's going to come and see you." Now, Peter himself has 3 sons. He really wanted to help. And he said, "Look, I think that we can basically just lean on Ballymore's existing contractors and suppliers. And because we've got so many ongoing projects in London, we can just bring them down to Box Hill. It's an hour's drive, we can get them down. And so we can just lean on all these existing relationships and get a lot of stuff for free, just out of people's goodwill. And if it means, using 30, 40, 50 different suppliers and contractors, that's what we'll do." So it was quite unusual, because that goodwill kind of evolved alongside all the planning and design that David and his team were doing. And there was a certain kind of just the alchemy of positive action, which is sometimes you kind of think, well, actually, we don't have enough money, but fuck it, we'll keep going forward, keep working hard, and hopefully get a positive outcome. And that's kind of what happened. There was a wonderful alchemy there, because I think everybody kind of wanted the same thing. I think the other big thing for David, go back to David, is that, we spend quite a lot of time in hospices and stuff. There's quite a lot of respite care when there's some great charities out there help parents. And spending time in these hospices made us realize that because Theo and Oskar are only going to be with us for so long, we thought, actually, we want to create a space which then other Duchenne families in the future could benefit from. If Theo and Oskar are with us for another 10, 15 years, would we still want to live here? Maybe not. At which point, another family, because that's what the house is built for and that's what it's designed for, it's a perfect house for two boys with a serious progressive disability. And Ballamore liked that idea that actually that you were putting a kind of, there was a legacy behind it, something which could be used for future generations. Back to David.
Thanks, Nick. So that certainly kind of the introduction of Ballamore and their supply chain, and what they could do was, I mean, obviously it was absolutely fantastic, and was a huge gift to the project. And it was brilliant because it would go incredible kind of positive spirit of a can-do attitude and kind of that knowledge. But I think interestingly, it brought us down a road where what was obviously we were developing something which was incredibly bespoke in terms of it from its start point and what it needed to do. And in that sense, there were certain elements we'd already designed for and considered as the kind of best possible solution to this, to the brief we needed to achieve. But also Ballamore coming to it, they actually had ways of building. And ways of building that obviously are completely appropriate when you're doing 15 to 20 stories of development, and then maybe between 200 to 300 homes at a time, but perhaps not necessarily as appropriate when you're doing a single story extension for a cottage in the Surrey Hills. But it was that kind of marriage of, okay, well, look, we got to do this and let's make this work, which was fantastic. And I think to the betterment of this project, that actually we were doing things that you simply would not be thinking about doing if it was approached from a different way. And ultimately it was brilliant. It was eye-opening. It was we were doing things that were really quite unique, and putting together construction typologies that wouldn't be considered in this environment in any other point in time. So I think this kind of little diagram kind of gives a quick assessment of kind of what were those kind of real sort of elements. And it was obviously kind of prefabrication we wanted to use as a fundamental of this project, and the roof form could not be done in any other way. And really kind of, obviously it was a huge amount of time on the drawing board, but we'd hoped that through prefabrication it would be made offsite, brought together in X number of pieces, and then put together on site in a rapid fashion, and it certainly was. The other obviously fundamental was how are we going to build where there were kind of masonry walls, and initially kind of envisaged to be sort of typical kind of blockwork construction or steelwork frame with columns. Actually, Ballamore's typical construction forms was to use Hertz kind of concrete sandwich panels that are all sort of taken. They're all done in Europe. I think they're all in. We were getting them from Holland, and brought over, and they're obviously kind of installed on site. So we had to use that aspect, and really some of this construction was an evolution of those principles. And then set behind that, obviously, then there was some fairly more, I would say, some more traditional timber construction for the front half of the house to create the kind of simple sort of vernacular roof forms. So going into the kind of development of the roof form, these were our engineers, and we worked with the engineers right from the competition stage. They came with us when we first when we had our interviews for the second stage of the competition, because we knew that from the brief and the issues such as hoists and having kind of flexibilities of walls, that the engineering of this was sort of fundamental, those sort of pragmatic considerations. And if you don't think about them early enough, it's very then hard to kind of consider how you can bring a really joyful, lovely, beautiful piece of architecture together if it becomes a kind of quasi afterthought. So that aspect of the fundamentals of engineering was at the heart of everything we did. And so yes, this 4.5, 5 meter cantilevered roof form with its sort of composite glue, lam and plywood structures had a quite a considerable design process, and we then had to partner up reasonably early to find a manufacturer who could put this roof form together for us. And then, from everything from there on, we also then will work with Ballamore in terms of actually where we would get our glazing from, how we would do all the other elements of the build to sort of to accompany this sort of ambitious roof form. So, as I say, one of these other important elements were these prefabricated concrete sandwich panels by Herx Facades. And through kind of some very early on discussions, they said, no, we know the guys who are going to make all these kind of structural wall elements, guys. So these are the guys we're using. Please laser them direct. They'll do absolutely everything you want and go from there. Now, as I say, they were enormously professional, very, very eager to help. And it was fantastic to be doing this kind of work, which what would typically be, they would create sort of bespoke kind of elements that would obviously be repeatable for, say, 30 stories. They made 9 or 10 absolutely bespoke concrete forms for us. Everyone was different, and got it kind of made and then transported across from Europe to us on site. And it was a really, really interesting aspect of the process, and went up very, very quickly as a regard. And then we teamed up with Buckland Timber, who are glulam manufacturers. And I think at the time, and maybe things obviously moved on a little bit since then, this is one of, they told us, was one of the first examples, and perhaps still remains so, of this form of construction being used for residential extension in the country, which obviously in one sense was, made us very proud. But in the second stage, obviously there was a big concern, and we were worried that we were just very, very hopeful that this thing would all come together, and it wasn't some sort of flash in the pan and we were being over clever about it. We were convinced it was the exact right thing to do given the brief. But when you get told that this is completely something that nobody's done before, it does sort of obviously sometimes make you think again about, gosh, should we be doing it in a more traditional way? But no, we really were very keen to make sure kind of offsite was an intrinsic part of what we're doing, and it really certainly did. It was amazing when they constructed in their workshop upside down to check everything came together. Obviously had all the steel work with them, and then they literally just packaged it up, put it in a lorry, brought it down, and then just built it on site really, really quickly. It was absolutely fantastic process to see. And so here it is, sort of as when those two fundamental components were there, it was a very, very exciting juncture in the build process, because you really, really you could see the architecture coming to life. And I kind of actually, frankly, the timber against the concrete was just a beautiful kind of form. And just seeing this kind of almost this wing form kind of sailing out over the garden space set against the existing building, and its kind of lightness, and that kind of something that was very much of our time, and a very much a sort of a 21st sort of century kind of consideration against kind of the traditional construction of the existing cottage. And it was good to see that they could sit quite nicely and calmly together as well, so that there wasn't some sort of crash and conflict. But those two different ways of thinking and building could sit very, very nicely together as a kind of, I don't know, an overall piece. So I think over to Nick now, because I think one other thing, whilst we've been looking at nice images and construction, Nick and the family were living at the end of the garden, seeing this whole thing evolve in it for all its, all the stress and strain that any construction project comes with. And this was no different. And I think to add on to that, I was enormously like kind of how you guys all managed to live through that process. I don't know sometimes, but it was amazing to see fundamentally.
So we decided that because we had the mortgage on the house, we thought, well, actually, we didn't really want to pay rent as well. So what we thought was, let's build a cabin at the back of the garden and live in it. And we I think in the end, the total, we were in there for 13 months. I don't think we probably would have elected to live in there for 13 months had we known it would be 13 months. it took longer mainly because of how we did this, which is, as David says, I think when teams were on site, built construction parts of the process happened very quickly. It was often just getting those teams on site, and implicit in the fact that we had so much goodwill, there were times we just had to be patient. So, Ballamore would pick up the phone and say, listen, the roof guys can't get down to those dates. You're just gonna have to hang on. And so, look, it was in a way, it was hard, but it was also kind of wonderful because we were living there and seeing it evolve. And actually, it meant that we could take Theo and Oskar down there and say, right, you can see your bedroom now. The walls are up. This is the roof. And so they could actually see, the work as it was happening. And I think also it was just lovely in a way because of that magical space, the garden, everything. It was lovely to still be there. Look, it was a curious one, probably a bit like lockdown. Actually, it was a mixed bag of kind of despair and joy in equal measure. But yeah, so that's where we were for 13 months.
Yeah, incredible. I mean, I think definitely whilst you're saying, Nick, it was definitely, that was one of the interesting parts of the process was, working with Ballamore, obviously their supply chain, which obviously had these fantastic benefits. But yeah, you're absolutely right in saying at some points, we just had to hold on for, various materials. And I remember coming down once, and it was, I think the site form was like, well, the burnt timber you wanted to have on the front. Well, frankly, David, we couldn't get that. So we've got 3 or 4 different types of slate, and we'll put them out for you. Which one do you want? And then we're gonna have to design this really damn quickly on site. And you can have whatever look you want, but this is the materials we got to go with. So that was pretty frenetic action of like changing all the detailing and then recladding it on the front to make it feel exactly like what we wanted. But it had to be basically, this is what the guys could get. So that's it. It still looks fantastic, but it was kind of some of these kind of slightly evolutionary moves we just had to make because that's what was available and that's what they could do. So that's just another classic thing that happens on building sites. So we just had to get on with it. But made for a good process. So I guess this then neatly brings us on to this. What happened in the end? What did we get? And I think this sort of front and back elevation sort of sets out what the house kind of eventually looked like. So, as we're saying here, a creation of this new wing of the building, and kind of the glazed corners of the boys' bedrooms here that kind of look out over it, and sitting against sort of getting lovely light from the south, but that protected against the canopy, this tree canopy notion, and us then creating that kind of link then to create an extension for the living spaces which sat between the old house and the new house, as it were, and this sort of veranda notion at the back. And then equally, then you can clearly see the sort of the separation and what came about from at the front of it between the existing building, and we actually built up all the levels. Ballamore were extremely kind. What we initially thought we'd only be able to do the front right hand side to build it all up. They actually turned up with enormous amounts of lorries and diggers and everything else, and re-landscaped the entire front of the building to make an entirely level access all the way across. So it wasn't initially envisaged, but they were enormously helpful in just making that possible. And so here's our new extension, with the vernacular kind of roof form, what became a kind of slated front of the building, that kind of link between kind of old and new, sort of connection of creating a neat recess to kind of mirror the existing veranda. But obviously it's very much of our time, and it's very much a contemporary building. So, that kind of setting and having a very, very large new welcoming door opening. And actually, when you're there, you can see all the way through the house from sort of back to front, and kind of through the one of the boys' bedrooms right out to the front of the house. So it's actually quite nice seeing that view all the way through, and you kind of get those glimpses of the garden. and yes, that kind of it's quite dramatic, really, at night, and how the roof and kind of these light glaze, sort of the folding screens, are pushed back into the kind of wall zones, so then you get that kind of lovely kind of neat opening between the inside and outside of the house. And yeah, kind of just trying to kind of find new storage niches where we could within the existing house, and always kind of trying to express this kind of roof wherever we could. And kind of, again, kind of different spaces. So this is how it feels from inside the new extension to the living space in the middle, where you kind of get the largest, deepest kind of corner of it. And again, for us, it was very much just kind of those views out down deep into the garden, really. I mean, this is obviously just lovely to have sat over the top of you, but really the reason for doing all of this was to create this barrier-free, lovely environment where the home and the garden were one. And that for us was just kind of was always in our minds when we were considering the design of this home. And I think going slightly further down, I think the other important thing was, the existing house. It should be forgotten. This is a lovely little cottage, and we didn't want to. That's a kind of the spirit of that existing home is really quite beautiful, and we didn't want to lose that. We wanted just to add to it, and for us it was this was kind of the new entrance door from the front, and obviously you've got kind of a lovely wide hallway, and this is the back of the existing house, and kind of expressing the back of the chimney stack as part of this kind of new, gave it a kind of lovely warmth and characterful nature. And beyond that, again, this idea of retaining as many of the sort of timber beams within the existing spaces was kind of why Nick and Clara, I think, fell in love with the house to start with. So we certainly didn't want to go ruining any of that. And again, it was just to try and create that spirit, but also add in what we could do to make it a 21st century home. And kind of as I say, it's this the idea of the sort of the greenness and going back to that kind of microcosm of the Surrey Hills, and really kind of the kind of just creating kind of sweeping paths within the garden, and letting this new element sort of be part of that story overall was really fundamental to us. And I think probably at this juncture we almost hand over to Nick, but it was really kind of, it never should be just about the kind of architecture. It's like the ultimate kind of test is, well, how can a family, any family, live in a home, or any user use the space that's created with them and for them? And we this is still early days for us in that part of the process. And it's really kind of for Nick, Clara, and the boys to really then tell us how did we achieve what was set out. It's always a kind of a really exciting kind of journey, but really the ultimate litmus test is those the 5 to 10 years of living in a house, and how it becomes used, how the spaces evolve, and all of those sort of crucial things is really where hopefully the good work and hard work that's put in by everyone on the team, from architects, engineers, and all the contractors involved, has to be seen. I'll leave it to you, Nick.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, we've actually only been living in this place actually it's about a year and a half, and it's really interesting, actually. I mean, we sort of enjoy it more and more, and we feel that you can feel the future proofing really kicking in, because I mean, Theo, he's almost 10, and he's definitely on that downward trajectory quite sharply now. So he's got an electric chair now, and he's just got a bed, a special bed to make it easier for him to kind of to sleep and get up in the morning and everything else. And you can see how when you bring those new objects into the house, probably in any other house, that's what often overwhelms I suppose people with disability, is there's things often feel very institutional, and you're sort of basically surrounded by gear, to the point where any kind of character that you might have in your home is kind of lost. And it's strange with this place, almost reverse is true, you know, where actually, you know, when you bring a piece of kit in, it sort of fits, and it doesn't fit institutional. You know, the beds are like hospital beds are in Wales and everything else, and the chairs are the chairs, but it just doesn't feel that way. And that's what's quite striking, actually, because we were very conscious of you know, what a lot of disabled housing is like. And that's something that we were really keen to get away from. You know, we didn't want the boys to spend their lives feeling like they were living in an institution. In fact, quite the opposite. And so everything that informed this whole project and design was the antithesis of that. And we're really feeling that. So yeah, we're very incredibly grateful, really, for the you know, for the architecture and for the whole thing coming together. It's great. Yeah, it's really great.
You're muted, David.
Sorry. Yeah. So I think yeah, Nick, that's amazing. So thank you very much for wrapping everything up. James, I guess sort of over to you now. Probably take any questions.
Shall I attempt to play the film?
Yes.
Yeah, give it a go.
Give it a go.
Can you see that?
That's working. Yeah, I can see that.
Okay.
Haven't got sound on my side.
No sound.
Okay.
No sound.
Sorry.
It's all right. We tried.
We tried.
Yeah.
Shall I I'll put the link in the chat and people can watch it.
Yeah, good idea.
Good idea.
Yes.
And whether there's any questions as well, if you want to ask any questions before we finish. Anybody? Okay, well, if there's no questions, should we wrap it up? I just want to say thank you. It was really fascinating, David and Nick, for speaking as well. I found it really interesting, and I hope everybody else did too. So,
Thanks, James.
The link is to that video is in the chat. If somebody's typing. But yeah, thank you, and if there's any questions, I suppose just type them. If not, we'll say goodbye. Well, you'll be welcome to leave in your own time. Okay, a couple of people are saying thank you and a fantastic project.